My brother told me I could come to his engagement dinner. He just had one condition: don't tell anyone you're my sister. His fiancée's father is a United States Senator, a former Marine colonel. A man who'd spent 2 decades looking for a woman he called the Angel of Hindu Kush. That woman was me. And I was sitting outside on the porch, alone, because my own brother put me there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started. Or close enough. It was a Thursday evening, late October, the kind of night where the air in Northern Virginia already has teeth. That sharp, clean bite that tells you summer didn't just leave, it packed its bags and slammed the door. I was sitting in my apartment in Alexandria, a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like someone else's cooking and quiet desperation. My shoes were off. My knee was propped up on a pillow because the cold had been getting to it all week, and the ache had settled into that deep, grinding rhythm that meant I'd be reaching for the cane tomorrow whether I wanted to or not. I was eating leftover carnitas from a container with a fork that didn't match anything else in the drawer, watching something on Netflix I couldn't name if you paid me, and trying very hard not to think about the fact that I'd spent 11 hours that day listening to men describe the worst moments of their lives. That's my job. I'm a post-traumatic stress disorder counselor at a veterans center in Alexandria. I sit across from soldiers, Marines, airmen, and I help them find their way back from the places their minds won't let them leave. It's good work, important work. The kind of work that empties you out by 5 o'clock and leaves you staring at cold carnitas wondering if you remembered to eat lunch. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I ignored it again. Then it buzzed a 3rd time, and I looked over because 3 calls in a row either means someone is dead or someone needs something, and in my family, it was almost always the second one. The name on the screen said Jordan. My brother hadn't called me in 5 months. Not since our mother's birthday in May, when he showed up 45 minutes late in a suit that cost more than my rent, kissed Mama on the cheek, spent the whole dinner talking about a campaign he'd managed for some pharmaceutical company, and left before dessert. He didn't ask about my work. He didn't ask about my knee. He didn't ask about anything, because Jordan had long ago decided that the most efficient way to manage me was to not think about me at all. So when his name showed up 3 times in a row, I set the carnitas down and answered. Megan. He said my name before I even finished saying hello. His voice had that tone. If you have a sibling who only calls when they need something, you know the tone. It's the voice of someone who's already rehearsed what they're about to say and is annoyed that you haven't agreed yet. I need to talk to you about something important. Hi, Jordan. I'm good, thanks. Long day. 11 hours of trauma counseling, but yeah, still breathing. Thanks for asking. Megan, I'm serious. He was always serious. That was the whole problem with Jordan. My brother had been serious since he was 9 years old. Student body president in middle school, debate captain in high school. Communications degree from Georgetown, magna cum laude. Now a vice president of communications at a pharmaceutical company where everyone wore charcoal gray and spoke in press releases. Jordan had been building his life like a marketing campaign since puberty, and God help anyone who didn't fit the brand. I'm getting engaged, he said. I almost dropped the fork. Wait, to Isabel? Of course to Isabel. Who else? I don't know, Jordan. You rotate girlfriends like quarterly reports. I lose track. He didn't laugh. He never laughed at my jokes anymore. There was a time, when we were kids, when I could make Jordan laugh so hard milk came out of his nose. That boy was gone, replaced by a man in a charcoal suit who'd learned to see the world as a series of optics. Her family is hosting a dinner this Saturday, he continued, a formal engagement celebration. Her parents, extended family, family friends, some colleagues of her father's. It's a significant event. Okay, that sounds nice. I was already doing the math on whether I could swap my Saturday with Dr. Reeves at the center. I want you to come. I stopped chewing. This was new. Jordan hadn't invited me to anything in over 2 years. Not his firm's holiday party. Not his housewarming when he bought the condo in DuPont Circle. Not Thanksgiving. He told Mama he was spending it with Isabel's family and simply left me out of the conversation, the way you leave a jacket in a restaurant and don't bother going back for it. Really? I said, and I hated myself for how quickly the hope showed up in my voice. Like a dog that's been kicked a dozen times but still limps to the door when it hears the car pull in. 35 years old, a decorated combat veteran, a woman who'd pulled men off mountains in snowstorms, and here I was, tail-wagging because my brother remembered I existed. "Yes," Jordan said, "but I need you to understand something, and I need you not to overreact." There it was, the clause, the fine print. With Jordan, there were always terms and conditions. His love came with an asterisk, and the footnote never said anything good. "Isabel's father is Charles Ashford," he said. He said it the way people say names you're supposed to recognize, like he'd just said the president or the pope. Okay, I waited. Senator Charles Ashford, Megan, United States Senate, Virginia. He's been in office 22 years. Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee, former Marine Colonel. His family has been in Virginia politics for 4 generations. I knew exactly who Charles Ashford was, better than Jordan could possibly imagine. But I didn't say that. Not yet. "Right," I said carefully. "So this dinner is a big deal." "It's a very big deal. His family is a certain kind of people, Megan. Old Virginia money, military legacy, very traditional, very polished. The guest list includes donors, colleagues, retired generals. This isn't a backyard barbecue. And I'm not polished. I didn't say it. He was about to. "I just need everything to go smoothly," he said. And then, the pause. The careful, calculated pause of a man choosing his words the way a communications executive picks a talking point, deliberately, strategically, with the audience in mind. "You can come to the dinner," Jordan said. "But I'd prefer it if you didn't tell anyone you're my sister." I set the carnitas down on the coffee table. The fork clinked against the side of the container, and in the silence of my apartment, it sounded like a bell. "Excuse me? Just hear me out. You want me to come to your engagement dinner and pretend I'm not your sister?" "It's not personal, Megan. Not personal." I turned that phrase over in my mouth like a stone. My brother was asking me to erase myself from our shared blood in front of 60 strangers, and it wasn't personal. That's like saying a bullet isn't personal. It is when you're the one it hits. "Then what is it?" I asked. My voice was calm. 11 hours a day of sitting with men who've seen things that would break most people teaches you how to keep your voice steady when everything behind it is shaking. "It's strategic," Jordan said, and I could almost hear him shift into boardroom mode. "Her father's a senator, Megan, a former Marine colonel. There are people at this dinner. Donors, retired generals, intelligence community figures. I've spent 2 years building this relationship, 2 years making sure every detail is right. I told them you're a college friend, an old friend from school. That's all. It's just simpler." "Simpler for who?" "For everyone." There was a pause. The kind of pause that lives between 2 people who used to share a bedroom and now share nothing. "Look," Jordan said, and his voice softened just enough to be dangerous. That was his gift. He could make cruelty sound reasonable. He could package rejection in the language of logic and make you feel like the unreasonable one for bleeding. "Mama and Papa agree with me." That one landed. That one always landed. It was Jordan's ace, his kill shot, the card he played when he needed me to stop fighting. Because I could argue with Jordan all night. But when he put our parents behind him like a shield, I couldn't swing without hitting them too. "You talked to Mama and Papa about this before calling me. They understand the situation. They'll be seated at a middle table, table 6, I think, close enough to the front to be comfortable, far enough back to not draw attention. And you?" He paused again. "There's a table on the back porch." "Outside. It's a beautiful porch, Megan. Heated. Overlooks the property. You'll have a lovely view." "You're putting me outside." "It's an outdoor seating area. It's Virginia countryside. It's charming." "Jordan, you're putting me outside the building. I'm putting you somewhere comfortable where you won't have to interact with anyone who might ask questions. You won't have to lie. You won't have to perform. Just show up, have some wine, enjoy the view, and we all get through the night." We all get through the night. Like I was a storm that needed to be weathered. Like my presence was a natural disaster his carefully constructed evening needed to survive. Let me tell you something about my brother. Jordan Torres was born 38 years ago in a 2-bedroom apartment in Falls Church, Virginia, to a father who worked 60 hours a week as an electrician and a mother who spent her days as a school nurse and her evenings making sure 2 kids had clean uniforms and full stomachs. We grew up speaking Spanish at home and English at school. We ate arroz con pollo on weeknights and tamales on Sundays. Our father's hands were permanently calloused. The kind of rough that doesn't wash off. The kind that tells the story of every wire he ever pulled and every panel he ever mounted. Jordan looked at those hands and decided he wanted different ones. I don't say that with cruelty. I say it because it's the truth, and truth is the only currency I deal in anymore. My brother looked at our father's hands, our mother's double shifts, our last name that people stumbled over at school, and he made a decision. He was going to build a version of himself that fit somewhere else. Somewhere with polished floors and last names that didn't need pronunciation guides. He stopped speaking Spanish by the time he was 15, changed the way he said Torres so it rhymed with doors instead of rolling off the tongue the way our mother said it. Got into Georgetown on a scholarship, and came back that first Thanksgiving with new vowels and a blazer that didn't come from the outlet mall. I don't blame him for wanting more. I blame him for being ashamed of where the wanting started. And here's the thing. If you've ever been the person your family treats as the rough draft while everyone else gets to be the final version, if you've ever been the sibling who didn't follow the script and spent the rest of your life being reminded of it, then you're going to want to stay for this one. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a like. Because stories like this one don't just deserve to be heard. They need to be. So I said yes. Why? You're probably wondering that. I've asked myself the same question 1,000 times since that night, and the best answer I've got is this. I was tired. Not tired like I didn't sleep enough. Tired like something inside me had been carrying a weight for so long it forgot what it felt like to set it down. And maybe Jordan would look across the room and feel something. Anything. That's the trap, isn't it? We keep going back to the people who make us small, hoping that this time, they'll let us be full-sized. Fine, I said. I'll be there. Jordan exhaled. Relief. The sound of a man whose campaign just got its funding approved. Great. I'll send you the address. Dress code is formal. And Megan? What? Maybe leave the cane in the car. If you can. I didn't answer. I just sat there. Phone pressed to my ear. Looking at the cane leaning against my bedroom door. Oak wood, hand-carved, with my unit's insignia etched into the handle. A gift from a man I'd carried through a snowstorm. A man who'd carved it himself during his recovery because he said he wanted me to have something beautiful to lean on since I'd given him something beautiful to stand for. And my brother wanted me to leave it in the car. Good night, Jordan, I said. I hung up, set the phone down, looked at the cane for a long time. And something shifted inside me. Not anger, something colder than anger, cleaner. The kind of thing that happens in the field when the plan falls apart and you stop hoping things will go right and start seeing things exactly as they are. Clarity. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to stand on a table and announce my last name. I was going to do exactly what Jordan asked. Sit on the porch, drink the wine, smile at the stars. And whatever happened after that, well, that would be on them. Friday came the way Fridays do when you're dreading Saturday. Too fast, too ordinary, like the world hasn't bothered to read ahead in the script and doesn't know what's coming. I spent the day at the center. 8 sessions. 8 men sitting across from me in a small room with bad lighting and a box of tissues that never seemed to be enough. A 26-year-old Marine who couldn't stop checking roof lines when he walked down the street. A 43-year-old sergeant who hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in 2 years. A retired corpsman who cried for the first time in 9 sessions and then apologized for it, because that's what we teach men in this country. We teach them to bleed quietly. My phone rang at 6:15. I knew who it was before I looked. Mija. My mother's voice. Rosa Torres has a voice like warm bread. Soft, round, the kind of voice that makes you feel like everything might be okay even when it's not. She speaks English perfectly, has for 30 years, but when she's emotional, the Spanish leaks through like water through old wood. You can hear it in her vowels, the way they stretch and soften, carrying the ghost of another language underneath. Hi, Mama. About tomorrow, sweetheart. I know. Back porch. College friend. Don't mention the family tree. A pause. I could hear the television in the background, some game show, and underneath that, the faint sound of my father moving around in the kitchen. Miguel Torres at 6:15 on a Friday evening. I could picture him without trying. Still in his work clothes, the navy pants and the shirt with his name stitched over the pocket, washing his hands at the kitchen sink with the orange soap that never quite got the electrical grease out of the creases. My father is not a quiet man because he has nothing to say. He's a quiet man because somewhere along the way he decided that his words cost too much and his family couldn't afford them. "It's not like that, Misha," Rosa said. "It's exactly like that, Mama. Your brother has worked so hard. This family, the Ashfords, they're very important people. Isabel is a lovely girl. We just don't want to complicate things." "Mama, what exactly about me is complicated?" She didn't answer right away. And that silence, that 3-second gap where my mother's love ran headfirst into my mother's fear and couldn't decide which way to fall, that was the answer. That was always the answer. Here's what you need to understand about my family. My mother, Rosa Maria Torres, came to this country from Guadalajara when she was 19 with $200, a nursing certificate, and a belief in the American dream so fierce it could have powered a city block. She married my father, Miguel, a first-generation Mexican-American who'd learned the electrician's trade from his own father and built a business out of it with nothing but his hands and a stubbornness that bordered on religion. They bought a house in Falls Church. Small, 2-bedroom, backyard just big enough for a grill and Rosa's tomato plants. They raised 2 children the way immigrant families do. With sacrifice and silence, and the unspoken understanding that everything they endured was payment for a future they'd never get to live in themselves. Jordan was that future, the firstborn, the golden child, the one who got the grades, the scholarship, the suit, the corner office. Jordan was proof that the sacrifice had worked, that the calloused hands and the double shifts and the prayers whispered in Spanish over a kitchen table had produced something polished enough to belong in rooms with chandeliers. And then there was me. I was the one who didn't follow the plan. The one who, at 18, walked into the living room and told my parents I was enlisting in the United States Air Force instead of going to college. My mother cried for 3 days. My father didn't speak to me for a week, and when he finally did, all he said was, "Be careful, Mija," 2 words. But the way he said them, low and cracked, like something inside him was tearing along a seam he'd been holding together for years, those 2 words carried more weight than anything Jordan ever said in a boardroom. I served. I came home. I came home with medals and scars and a limp that got worse in the cold and nightmares that got worse in the silence. I got my degree afterward. Psychology, GI Bill. Top of my class. But by then, the narrative was set, carved into the family story like initials in concrete. Jordan was the success. I was the detour. The one they loved, absolutely. The one they bragged about, never. My mother once told a neighbor I worked in healthcare. Not that I was a combat rescue officer. Not that I'd earned the Air Force Cross. Healthcare, like I answered phones at a clinic. She wasn't being malicious. She was being careful. Because explaining me required explaining things that didn't fit the version of the Torres family that Jordan had spent 20 years constructing. My father was different. Not better, just different. Miguel Torres is not a cruel man. He's the kind of man who works a double shift and still comes home to fix the neighbor's porch light because she's 83 and shouldn't have to walk to her door in the dark. But he's also a man who has spent his entire life avoiding conflict the way some people avoid highways. If Jordan says the sky is green, my father closes the curtains and pretends he wasn't looking. So when my mother called to confirm that I would sit on the porch and pretend not to share DNA with the man whose engagement we were celebrating, I wasn't surprised. "Okay, Mama," I said. "I'll behave." "Thank you, Mija. You know we love you." "I know." And she did. That's the part that makes it hurt. She did love me. They both did. They just loved me in a room with the door closed, where nobody important could see. After I hung up, I looked at the photo on my wall. Me and Jordan, ages 7 and 10, standing in the backyard in Falls Church. I'm in a sundress with grass stains on the knees. He's in a baseball jersey. We're both holding popsicles that are melting faster than we can eat them, and we're laughing. I don't remember what was funny, I just remember the laughing. That boy used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. He used to read me stories in Spanish because Mama said it was important to keep the language alive. He used to call me Meganita and tickle me until I couldn't breathe. That boy wouldn't have put me on a porch. But that boy grew up, traded his jersey for a blazer, and decided the porch was exactly where I belonged. In my family, Jordan was the final version. I was the rough draft, and rough drafts don't get seated at the main table. Let me tell you who I am. Not who my brother thinks I am. Not the version my parents find easier to explain at dinner parties. The real version. The unedited one. My name is Megan Torres. I'm 35 years old. I'm a post-traumatic stress disorder counselor at a veterans center in Alexandria, Virginia. Before that, I spent nearly a decade in the United States Air Force as a combat rescue officer. If you don't know what that is, let me put it simply. When soldiers get hurt in places the world has forgotten about, when helicopters go down in mountains nobody can pronounce, when the extraction team needs someone crazy enough to walk into fire and carry people out, that was my job. I was one of the first women to complete combat rescue officer training. Not the first, I don't hold that title, but I was in the first wave, and I can tell you that the men who trained beside me didn't make it easy. Some of them didn't think I belonged. Some of them said it to my face. I earned my place the way everyone in that pipeline earns it. By not quitting when every cell in my body was screaming at me to stop. 3 tours, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Somalia. I've fast roped out of helicopters into places where the air was so thin my lungs burned and the ground was so hostile that every shadow could kill you. I've applied tourniquets in the dark while bullets cracked overhead like someone snapping branches. I've held a 22-year-old airman's head in my lap while we waited for a medevac that was 8 minutes out, and I told him jokes, bad ones, the kind his mother would have been embarrassed by, because I needed him to stay awake, and laughing was the only thing keeping his eyes open. He made it. Most of them made it. Not all, but most. I have a scar that runs along my left shoulder from a piece of shrapnel I caught during an extraction in Mogadishu. I lost 2 toes on my right foot to frostbite on a mountain in Afghanistan, the details of which I'll get to later. And my right knee, the one that aches when the cold settles in, the one that makes me reach for the cane on days when the barometric pressure drops. That knee took the impact when I fell, carrying a man nearly twice my weight through a snowstorm at 12,000 feet. For all of it. For the missions and the blood and the toes and the knee and the nights I spent staring at the ceiling of a military hospital, wondering if I'd ever walk without pain again, I received the Air Force Cross. It's the second highest military decoration in the United States Air Force, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. The citation is framed in a box in my closet because I never found the right wall for it. The medal itself is in my desk drawer at the Veterans Center, underneath a stack of intake forms and a bag of peppermints I keep for clients who need something to hold on to during hard sessions. That's who I am. That's the woman Jordan wanted to hide on a porch. But here's the part that should make your blood simmer. Jordan didn't know any of this. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. He didn't come to the ceremony when I received the Air Force Cross. He had a work conflict. He didn't read the article in the Washington Post that featured my unit's rescue mission. He didn't watch the segment on PBS NewsHour where they interviewed 3 of us about the failures of the military mental health pipeline. When I mentioned it once, casually, over Christmas dinner 2 years ago, he nodded and said, "That's cool, Meg," in the exact same tone he'd use if I told him I'd found a good parking spot at the grocery store. My parents were more engaged, to their credit. Mama cried when she read the Post article. Papa said he was proud in a voice that cracked at the edges, but it was a strange, compartmentalized kind of pride. The kind that existed in one room of the house but didn't travel to the others. They were proud of what I'd done, but they didn't let it change how they saw me. I was still the second child, still the one whose life didn't fit the template. And Jordan. Jordan had a particular talent for reducing me, not with cruelty, with indifference. He could take everything I'd survived, everything I'd earned, every scar and medal and sleepless night, and compress it into a single shrug. As if my entire military career was a minor detour on the way to something that mattered, except I never arrived at the something that mattered, because to Jordan, the something that mattered looked like his life. Corner office, Georgetown connections, charcoal suits and last names that didn't need translating. He asked me once, at Mama's birthday dinner, the last time I'd seen him, to try not to use the cane. He said it casually, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. "Can you try not to use the cane? It makes people uncomfortable." I didn't answer him. I just picked up my coffee, took a long sip, and let the silence do the talking. Because here's something the military teaches you that boardrooms never will. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. But I want you to sit with that for a moment. My brother looked at a cane that exists because I carried a wounded man off a mountain in a blizzard, a cane carved by the very man I saved, with my unit's insignia on the handle, and his first thought was that it made people uncomfortable. Not proud, not curious, uncomfortable. That's the kind of invisible I was in my own family. Not hated, not abused, just unseen, reduced, filed away in a drawer nobody opened, like a medal underneath a stack of intake forms. Now here's where the story turns. Here's where the ground shifts under your feet and everything you thought you understood about this dinner rearranges itself. When Jordan told me that his fiancé's father was Senator Charles Ashford, he said it like he was handing me a headline, like the name was supposed to impress me into compliance, and I let him think it worked. I let the pause sit there. I let him believe my silence was awe. It wasn't awe. It was arithmetic. My brain was doing the math at a speed Jordan couldn't have followed, connecting dots he didn't even know existed. Senator Charles Ashford, United States Senate, Virginia. 22 years in office, Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee. Before politics, a career Marine. Retired as a full colonel after 30 years of service, including deployments to Beirut, the Gulf War, and Bosnia. His family had been in Virginia for 4 generations, a dynasty of military service and public office. The Ashfords didn't just live in Virginia history, they were Virginia history. I knew all of this. But not from C-SPAN. Not from the news. Not because my brother had briefed me like a communications executive prepping a client. I knew Charles Ashford because his son-in-law, Major Daniel Ashford, was the man I'd carried off a mountain in the Hindu Kush. Let that settle for a moment. Daniel Ashford married Catherine Ashford, the senator's eldest daughter, 6 years before I ever met him. By the time our paths crossed, Danny was a decorated Army major with 2 tours under his belt and a reputation for being the kind of officer who ate last and slept least. He was also, on the night of September 14, 2019, a passenger on a CH-47 Chinook helicopter that went down in a snowstorm at 12,000 feet in the Hindu Kush mountains of eastern Afghanistan. I'll tell you the full story of that night later. For now, what matters is this. I led the rescue team that found the crash. I pulled Danny out of the wreckage. I carried him 200 meters through a blizzard with Taliban remnants firing from the ridgeline. And I lost 2 toes and most of the cartilage in my right knee doing it. Daniel survived. He went home to Catherine. And then, 6 months later, he almost didn't survive what came after. But that's another part of the story, and I'll get to it. What you need to know right now is the chain of connection that my brother had absolutely no idea existed. Senator Ashford knew about me. Not my name, not my face. He knew about the angel of Hindu Kush, which is what my unit called me after that night, half joke, half reverence, the way soldiers name things they can't quite explain. Danny had told his father-in-law the story, told him about the woman who'd come through the snow, who'd carried him when his legs were shattered, who'd kept him alive with nothing but a tourniquet and a promise. The senator had asked to meet me. Danny told him I preferred to stay anonymous. It was partly true. Mostly, it was because of what came later. The counseling, the sessions, the things Danny told me in that small room at the Veterans Center that were protected by a confidentiality I would never break. Not for a senator. Not for anyone. So, Charles Ashford knew my voice. He'd spoken to me 3 times by phone over the past 2 years. Calls routed through Danny's number. Always brief, always grateful. "I don't know your name," he said once, and I respect that. "But I want you to know that my family prays for you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, you call Danny, and it's done." I thanked him. I never called. He knew my voice. He knew my story. He knew what I'd sacrificed. He just didn't know my face, my name, or the fact that I was sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment in Alexandria eating leftover carnitas while his future son-in-law's brother asked me to pretend I didn't exist. And Jordan. My brilliant, Georgetown-educated communications executive brother. He had no idea. He didn't know I'd saved the senator's son-in-law. He didn't know I'd spent 18 months pulling Danny back from a darkness that nearly swallowed him whole. He didn't know the senator had a framed letter on his office wall, a letter Danny had written about the rescue, with my name redacted but my actions described in detail that made grown men weep. Jordan didn't know because Jordan never asked. Not once. Not in 5 years. He never asked what I did overseas. He never asked about the missions. He never asked about the knee or the toes or the cane or the nightmares or the men I'd saved or the ones I couldn't. He never asked because asking would have required him to see me, and seeing me would have complicated the architecture of a life he'd spent 2 decades building. And my parents. Here's the part that still burns when I think about it. My parents knew enough. They knew I'd served in Afghanistan. They knew about the rescue, in broad terms. Mama had read the article. Papa had seen the medal. They knew a man named Daniel had been involved because I'd mentioned it once, carefully, without last names, over dinner. They didn't connect the dots. Or maybe they did and chose not to, because connecting them would have meant confronting Jordan, and confronting Jordan was something the Torres family simply did not do. Either way, they knew enough. They knew their daughter had bled in a war zone, had earned the second highest decoration the Air Force could give, had built a career saving the minds of broken soldiers. They knew all of that, and they still agreed to put me on the porch. Think about that. Let it sit in your chest the way it sat in mine that Thursday night, heavy and still and sharp as glass. My brother was about to walk me into the home of a man who'd been searching for me for 5 years, a man who called me an angel, a man who'd told his family that he owed me a debt he could never repay. And Jordan was going to seat me outside, in the cold, where nobody could see me. He just didn't know it yet. Saturday arrived cold and bright, the kind of October morning that looks beautiful from behind glass, but bites the moment you step outside. I stood in front of my closet for 10 minutes, which is 9 minutes longer than I usually spend. I own exactly one formal dress. Black, simple, bought 2 years ago for a ceremony at the Veterans Center when they dedicated a new counseling wing. It still had the dry cleaning bag on it. I pulled it on. It fit fine. Showed the scar on my left shoulder, the one from Mogadishu, a pale, raised line that ran from the top of the deltoid down to the collarbone like a river on a map nobody wanted to read. I'd stopped trying to hide it a long time ago. I didn't bleed in a desert so I could be self-conscious at a dinner party. The cane was leaning against the bedroom door where it always lived, oak wood, hand-carved, my unit's insignia etched into the handle by a man whose legs I'd held together on a mountainside. I picked it up. I did not leave it in the car. Jordan could choke on his discomfort. I drove my 2011 Toyota Corolla west on Route 50, then south toward Middleburg. If you've never been to Middleburg, Virginia, let me paint it for you. It's the kind of town where the horses have better health insurance than most Americans. Stone walls, rolling hills, white fences that go on for miles, and money so old it doesn't need to announce itself. It just sits there, quiet and enormous, like a mountain that knows you're looking. The GPS guided me down a 2-lane road lined with oaks, whose leaves were somewhere between fire and surrender, gold and red and rust, clinging to branches like they knew what was coming but weren't ready to let go. I turned through a pair of iron gates that were open but clearly existed to remind you they could be closed, and followed a gravel driveway that curved for a quarter mile through manicured grounds before the house appeared. Ashford Hall. Of course it had a name. Because when your family has been in Virginia for 4 generations and your patriarch is a retired Marine colonel turned United States Senator, you don't just have a house, you have an estate. And estates have names the way ships have names, not because they need them, but because naming a thing is the first act of owning it. The house was federal style, red brick, white columns, symmetrical in the way old Virginia architecture insists on being, as though balance in a building could guarantee balance in the lives inside it. An American flag hung from a bracket near the front door. Beside it, smaller but no less deliberate, a Marine Corps flag. 2 flags, 2 identities, both earned. I counted the cars as I drove past them toward the back of the lot. 63, Mercedes, BMWs, a few Audis, 2 Cadillac Escalades, a Jaguar that looked like it had been polished with a prayer. And then, at the far end, between a black Range Rover and a silver Lexus, I parked my Corolla. It sat there looking like a community college student who'd accidentally walked into a board meeting and was too polite to leave. My knee announced itself the moment I stepped out. The cold had gotten into it during the drive, settled in deep, the way cold does when it finds an old injury and decides to stay. I leaned on the cane, took a breath, and looked at the house. Somewhere inside, 63 cars worth of people were drinking wine and making conversation about things that mattered to people who mattered. And I was about to walk in through a side entrance and pretend I didn't matter at all. I texted Jordan, "I'm here." His reply came in 4 seconds. Side door, east wing, I'll meet you there. Not the front door, the side door, the service entrance, the door the caterers used, I followed the gravel path around the east side of the house, past a row of boxwood hedges trimmed so precisely they looked like they'd been cut with surgical instruments, past a window through which I could see a kitchen full of staff in white jackets moving with the coordinated urgency of a field hospital. The side door was plain, white, unmarked, the kind of door that says you're welcome here, but only if nobody sees you come in. Jordan was waiting inside. He looked like a magazine had come to life and decided to run for office. Charcoal suit, blue tie, hair that had been styled with the kind of intentionality that pretends to be effortless. His shoes were polished to a mirror finish. He looked at me the way a security checkpoint looks at a bag that might contain something it's not supposed to. "You made it," he said. His smile was technically a smile, in the same way a fluorescent light is technically a light. It functioned, but it didn't warm anything. "I told you I would." His eyes moved over me, black dress, shoulder scar visible, cane in my right hand. I watched his jaw tighten for exactly 1 second, a micro-expression he'd learned to control everywhere except around me, because I was the one person who'd known him before he learned to control anything. "You brought the cane," he said. "I brought my leg, Jordan. The cane comes with it." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and led me down a hallway. Not the main hallway, the one I could see through an open door to my left, with its polished hardwood and oil paintings and warm light spilling from crystal chandeliers. The other hallway, the service corridor, white walls, industrial carpet, the faint smell of catering trays and reheated bread. We walked past the kitchen, past a storage room, past a door marked staff only. And as we turned a corner, I caught a glimpse through a set of double doors into the main dining room. Just a flash. 2 seconds. But it was enough. Crystal glasses catching candlelight. White tablecloths bright as fresh snow. Centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. The low hum of conversation and laughter, the kind of laughter that comes easily to people who've never had to wonder whether they belong in the room they're standing in. I saw the main table at the far end, long and grand, set for 12. And beyond it, 5, 6, 7 more tables radiating outward like rings from a stone dropped in still water. Then Jordan's hand touched my elbow, steering me forward, past the doors, away from the light, toward the back of the house, toward the porch. The porch was not what Jordan had described. When he'd said outdoor seating area, I'd pictured something attached to the party, connected. Maybe a terrace with glass doors thrown open, guests spilling out with cocktails, laughter bleeding between inside and outside like it couldn't tell the difference. This was not that. The back porch of Ashford Hall was a covered stone veranda that wrapped around the east corner of the house. It was lovely, I'll give him that. Wide, with thick oak columns and a slate floor that probably cost more per square foot than my apartment. On a summer evening, with the sun going down over the horse pastures and the Blue Ridge smudging the horizon, it would have been beautiful. A place you'd choose to sit. In late October, at 6:30 in the evening, with the temperature dropping through the 40s and the light already gone, it was exile. There was a small round table set with 2 chairs, white tablecloth, cloth napkins, a centerpiece of white roses that matched the ones I'd glimpsed inside, a single place setting, 1 wine glass, 1 set of silverware, 1 plate. They'd set the table for 1, which meant they'd always known the second chair would stay empty. An outdoor patio heater stood nearby, the tall, mushroom-shaped kind you see outside restaurants. It was on, but barely. The flame flickered weakly behind the glass like it was embarrassed to be there. Beyond the porch, the grounds rolled out into darkness. I could see the faint outlines of white fences, the silhouettes of oak trees, and further back, the long, low shape of the horse stables. A horse shuffled somewhere in the dark. I heard it snort, then go quiet. Even the animals had better shelter tonight. "Perfect," Jordan said behind me. He said it the way a stage manager says it when the set looks right, not warm, functional. "I'll check on you later. If you need anything, there's a service bell on the column there. Someone from catering will come out." A service bell. He'd given me a service bell, like I was room service, like I was an afterthought with a wine glass. Jordan. I turned around. He was already half inside, 1 foot in the warm hallway, 1 foot on the porch, perfectly balanced between the world he wanted to live in and the one he was leaving me in. "Tell Mama, I'm fine." Something crossed his face. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the faintest shadow of a memory, a flash of the boy who used to call me Meganita, surfacing for just a second before the man in the charcoal suit pushed it back under. "I will," he said, and he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the kind of click that sounds like nothing but feels like everything. I stood there for a moment, both hands on the cane, and let the cold settle around me. Then I sat down in the single chair at the single place setting and poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle they'd left. Red. A good one, probably. I couldn't tell. I've never been able to tell the difference between a $20 bottle and a $200 bottle, and I've always suspected that people who claim they can are just performing a kind of confidence I was never taught. From where I sat, I could see into the dining room through a set of floor-to-ceiling glass doors. The glass was thick, the kind that muffles sound, so what I saw was a silent movie. A room full of people in beautiful clothes, moving their mouths, lifting their glasses, touching each other's arms in that easy way people do when they feel safe. Candlelight made everything golden. Faces glowed. Laughter I couldn't hear looked like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I found my parents first. Table 6, middle of the room, just like Jordan had said. Mama was wearing the blue dress she'd bought for Easter 2 years ago. She was smiling, talking to a woman beside her, doing that thing she does with her hands when she's nervous, folding and unfolding her napkin like origami with no instructions. Papa was beside her, upright, careful, cutting his bread into precise halves the way he cuts everything. Methodical, controlled, a man who survived by measuring. Neither of them looked toward the porch, not once. I found Jordan at the main table, right side, beside Isabel, who was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with her dress and everything to do with the fact that she was a woman in love who didn't yet know what that love had cost someone else. Jordan's hand rested on the back of her chair, possessive, protective, the body language of a man who'd finally gotten everything he wanted and was terrified someone would take it away. At the head of the main table sat a man I recognized immediately, even through glass, even from 30 yards away, Senator Charles Ashford. Tall, silver-haired, broad-shouldered in the way of men who carried heavy things for a living before they carried heavy titles. He sat the way career military men sit, straight, present, as though his spine remembered a posture his rank no longer required. He was laughing at something someone said, and even through the muffled glass, I could tell it was a real laugh, the kind that shakes the shoulders. I'd heard that laugh before. 3 times, on the phone, through Danny's number, the laugh of a man thanking a stranger for his family. He was 30 yards away, separated by glass and candlelight and a lie my brother had built, like a firewall between his future and his past. And he had no idea I was sitting out here in the cold, watching his dinner party like a ghost looking in through the window of the life she used to haunt. Nobody looked toward the porch. 63 cars worth of people, and not a single pair of eyes drifted toward the glass doors at the back of the room, where a woman sat alone with a cane and a wine glass and the quiet understanding that she had been, once again, subtracted from the equation. He didn't check on me later. Nobody did. And I sat there, on a porch, in the Virginia cold, watching my family through glass like a child standing outside a window of a home she used to live in. 10 minutes. I counted them the way I used to count minutes on a mission. Not on a clock, in heartbeats, in breaths, in the small, measured increments of time that separate waiting from enduring. At 10 minutes, a server came through the side door with a plate. Salmon, asparagus, something with a foam on it that looked like a science experiment trying to be food. She set it down without making eye contact, smiled the way people smile at furniture, and disappeared back inside. The door closed. The warmth that had leaked out for those 3 seconds vanished like it had never existed. At 20 minutes, the patio heater coughed. The flame, which had already been struggling like a candle in a draft, flickered twice and went out. Just like that. No drama, no grand statement. It simply stopped, the way things stop when nobody's paying attention to them. I stared at it for a moment, then pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and decided it was a metaphor I didn't need explained. At 30 minutes, the cold found my knee. It always does. Cold has a memory for old injuries. It finds the scar tissue, the damaged cartilage, the places where the body was rebuilt but never quite restored, and it settles in like a tenant who knows you can't evict it. The ache started low, a dull hum, then deepened into something that pulsed with each heartbeat. I shifted in the chair, crossed my legs, uncrossed them, pressed my palm flat against the kneecap and held it there, as if my hand could negotiate with the pain. It couldn't. It never could. At 40 minutes, I ate 3 bites of the salmon. It was cold. Not room temperature cold. Virginia, October on an open porch cold. The kind of cold that turns good food into an accusation. I set the fork down and drank more wine instead. Through the glass, the party continued. Courses were served and cleared. Someone gave a toast. I could see glasses rising in unison, mouths moving in silent laughter. The choreography of celebration performed by people who had no idea there was an audience of one watching from the dark. Mama was on her second glass of wine. I could tell by her posture, slightly looser, her laugh slightly wider. Papa had migrated to a conversation with a man in a military dress uniform, probably a retired general, and for a moment I saw something in my father's face I rarely saw: animation, interest. The face of a man who was briefly allowed to be interesting instead of invisible. I wondered if he knew how that felt. I wondered if he'd ever connected it to how I felt right now. At 45 minutes, I stopped watching the party and started watching the grounds. The moon had come out from behind the clouds, and the horse pastures glowed silver blue. The stables were dark except for a single light above the main door. A horse moved inside, restless, its hooves clicking on concrete. I could smell hay and cold earth and the faint sweetness of dying leaves. October smells like endings, like things letting go. I thought about Bagram. I don't know why. The mind goes where it goes, especially when you're alone and cold and the ache in your knee has become a second heartbeat. I thought about the time my name was left off the commendation list after a mission where I'd pulled 3 wounded airmen to safety under fire. A clerical error, they said. These things happen. I'd stood in the operations tent and looked at the list on the bulletin board, 26 names, and mine wasn't there. I didn't say anything. I just turned around, walked to my bunk, sat down, and stared at the wall for a very long time. These things happen. They do. They happen a lot, and it's always the same people they happen to, the ones who don't complain, the ones who keep showing up, the ones who carry the weight without being asked and set it down without being thanked. We're easy to forget because we never make forgetting us difficult. I was doing it again. Sitting in the cold, carrying the weight, making it easy for everyone to pretend I wasn't there. At 50 minutes, my knee made the decision for me. The pain had escalated from ache to sharp, from sharp to the kind of grinding that means the joint is swelling, and if I didn't move soon, the walk to the car would go from uncomfortable to medical. I placed both hands on the cane and began to calculate. Across the porch, down the 3 stone steps to the lawn, 30 yards across the grass to the gravel path that ran along the east side of the house, another 50 yards down the path to the parking area. 3 minutes. Maybe 4 with the knee. I could do it quietly. Through the side gate, down the gravel, into the Corolla, and gone. No goodbyes, no scene. Just a woman disappearing from a place she was never meant to be seen in the first place. I put my napkin on the table, picked up the cane, shifted my weight forward. This was the version of the story where I left. The clean version. The dignified version. The version where the soldier walks away with her head high and her back straight and doesn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing what the cold did to her knee or what the silence did to her heart. My hand was on the back of the chair. My weight was on the cane. I was 1 second from standing, 1 breath from walking across that dark lawn toward my car and driving home to my apartment, where at least the walls didn't pretend they wanted me there, they just were there, which was honest enough. And then the side door opened. Not the glass doors that led to the dining room. The other door, the smaller one, around the corner of the porch, the one that connected to a mudroom that connected to the back hallway. The hinges creaked. Cold air shifted. Footsteps. Not the quick, efficient steps of a caterer bringing another plate of cold salmon. Slower, heavier. The footsteps of someone who wasn't in a hurry because they'd spent their whole life arriving exactly when they meant to. And a voice I hadn't heard in 14 months said my name. Megan? But before I tell you who opened that door, I need to take you somewhere else first. Somewhere cold and high and dark, where the wind sounded like it was trying to tear the world apart at the seams. I need to take you to the Hindu Kush. I mentioned earlier that I knew Senator Ashford, that I'd carried his son-in-law off a mountain. I gave you the headline. Now let me give you the story. September 14th, 2019. Eastern Afghanistan. The Hindu Kush mountain range, which stretches across the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan like a spine made of ice and stone. If you've never seen it, imagine the most beautiful place you've ever been, then make it want to kill you. Peaks that reach 20,000 feet. Valleys so deep the sun only touches the bottom for an hour a day. Air so thin that at 12,000 feet, every breath feels like you're drinking through a straw that's slowly closing. I was stationed at Bagram Airfield with the 308th Rescue Squadron. We were the ones they called when things went wrong in places no one else could reach. Pararescue, combat rescue. The motto is, "These things we do, that others may live." It sounds noble when you read it on a wall. It sounds different when you're living it at midnight in a blizzard. The call came at 22:17. A CH-47 Chinook, heavy-lift transport helicopter, had gone down in the Hindu Kush during a routine repositioning flight. 8 souls on board. The snowstorm had come in fast, faster than the weather models predicted, and the Chinook had clipped a ridge in near-zero visibility. The aircraft broke apart on impact. Emergency beacon activated. Radio contact lost. We scrambled in 11 minutes. 4 of us. Me, Sergeant First Class Booker, Staff Sergeant Ling, and Airman Hayes. We loaded into a Black Hawk that had no business flying in those conditions, but the pilot, a woman named Captain Vasquez, who had ice water where most people keep their blood, took us up anyway. She flew by instruments and instinct and what I can only describe as a personal disagreement with the concept of impossible. The flight took 40 minutes. The last 10 were the worst. Vasquez brought us in low through the valley, threading between rock walls I could have reached out and touched. Wind shearing across the rotors so hard the whole aircraft shuddered like a living thing trying to shake us off its back. She couldn't land. The crash site was on a ledge at 12,000 feet. Too narrow, too steep, too covered in wreckage and snow. She hovered, and we fast roped down into the dark. The moment my boots hit the ground, the cold tried to eat me alive. Not the polite cold of a Virginia October. The kind of cold that finds the gaps in your gear, the seams in your gloves, the space between your goggles and your balaclava, and pushes through like a blade. My lungs seized for a second. The air was so thin it felt like breathing through a coffee stirrer. I forced myself to inhale, exhale, inhale, counted to 4. The training kicks in. It always kicks in. That's the point of the training. The wreckage was scattered across 60 meters of mountainside. The Chinook had broken into 3 main sections. The cockpit was crushed against a rock face. The tail section had slid downhill and was hanging over an edge I couldn't see the bottom of. The middle section, the cargo bay, was where we found them. 6 alive, 2 dead. The 2 dead were in the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot. They'd taken the full force of the impact. I didn't look at them longer than I needed to. You learn that in the field. You assess, you categorize, you move. The living need you more than the dead do, and the dead understand that better than anyone. The 6 survivors were in various states of broken. A sergeant with a shattered collarbone and a gash across his forehead that had painted half his face red. A specialist curled in the fetal position with what turned out to be 3 cracked ribs and a punctured lung. A lieutenant with both arms dislocated who was somehow still conscious, still talking, still trying to give orders to men who couldn't hear him over the wind. 2 more, with concussions and lacerations, mobile but dazed, wandering through the wreckage like ghosts who hadn't figured out they were still alive. And then there was Danny. Major Daniel Ashford was pinned under a section of the cargo bay floor that had buckled on impact and folded down across both his legs. Both femurs were broken, not clean breaks. The kind of breaks where the bone doesn't snap so much as shatter, like a branch that's been twisted past its tolerance. He was losing blood from a laceration on his left thigh that had nicked the femoral artery. Not severed it, thank God, but nicked it enough that the snow under him was turning dark in a way that had a clock on it. He was conscious. That was the miracle and the curse. Conscious meant he could feel everything. Conscious meant he knew exactly how bad it was. His face was gray, not white, gray. The color skin turns when the body starts making choices about where to send the remaining blood, and the face loses the vote. I dropped beside him. Booker and Ling were working on the sergeant and the specialist. Hayes was stabilizing the lieutenant. I had Danny. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Torres, Combat Rescue. I'm going to get you out of here. He looked at me through the snow. His eyes were glassy but focused. The eyes of a man who was doing math he didn't want to finish. My legs, he said. I know, I see them. We're going to handle it. Both of them? Both of them. But you're alive, and I need you to stay that way. Can you do that for me? He tried to nod. The movement made him gasp. I put my hand on his chest, firm, steady, the way you anchor someone who's starting to drift. Don't move. Just breathe. Look at me. Right here. He looked at me, and then he said something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. His voice cracked, and the wind almost took the words, but I heard them. Every syllable. Don't let me die out here. I promised my wife I'd come home. I grabbed his vest with both hands and leaned in close enough that he could see my eyes through my goggles. Then hold on, Major, because I keep promises too. The next part is the part I don't tell in therapy sessions. Not because it's classified, because some memories live in your body, not your brain. And pulling them out feels less like remembering and more like reopening a wound that never quite closed. I freed Danny from the wreckage in 7 minutes. Booker helped me lever the buckled floor panel off his legs using a section of fuselage as a pry bar. When the metal lifted, Danny screamed. It was the kind of scream that doesn't come from the throat. It comes from somewhere deeper, somewhere primal, the place where pain lives before language was invented to describe it. I applied tourniquets to both thighs, packed the femoral laceration with hemostatic gauze, and held pressure until the bleeding slowed to something I could negotiate with. Then I looked at the terrain. The extraction point was 200 meters downhill. Vasquez couldn't bring the Blackhawk any closer. The ridge was too narrow, the wind too violent, and the wreckage had created an obstacle field of twisted metal and shattered rock that no helicopter could navigate. 200 meters. On flat ground, in daylight, with 2 working legs, that's a 3-minute walk. On a mountainside at 12,000 feet, in a blizzard, in the dark, carrying a man who weighed 190 pounds and couldn't move his legs, it was something else entirely. I looked at Booker. Booker looked at me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. He was handling 2 casualties who could walk with assistance. Ling had the specialist with the punctured lung on a makeshift litter. Hayes was half carrying the lieutenant. Everyone had someone. Danny had me. I got him onto my back. Fireman's carry. His arms over my shoulders, my hands locked under his thighs, careful, so careful, to grip above the brakes and below the tourniquets. He weighed 190 pounds. I weighed 140. The math didn't work. The math never works in combat. You do it anyway. The first 50 meters were downhill, which should have been easier but wasn't because the snow was knee-deep and the slope was steep enough that every step was a negotiation between gravity and willpower. My boots sank into the snow with each stride, and pulling them out required a kind of strength that doesn't come from muscles. It comes from the place where you keep the faces of the people you've already lost and the promise you just made to the man on your back. Danny was trying not to scream. I could feel him shaking, his chest against my back, his breath coming in sharp, short bursts that told me the pain was running out of places to hide. Talk to me, Danny, I said. Tell me about your wife. Catherine, he managed. Her name is Catherine. Good. Tell me about Catherine. She makes terrible pancakes, a sound that might have been a laugh. Worst pancakes you've ever had. Burns them every time, and she won't admit it. She just scrapes off the black parts and says they're rustic. Rustic pancakes. I like her already. She's pregnant, he said, and his voice broke on the word. 8 weeks. We just found out. I didn't stop walking. I couldn't. If I stopped, the cold would catch up, and the cold was already gaining. I could feel it in my toes. Not the normal cold of a winter night, but the deeper cold, the one that starts at the edges and works its way in, turning living tissue into something that can't feel anymore. My right foot was going numb. I could still move it, still push it through the snow, but the sensation was fading like a radio signal driving out of range. At 100 meters, the shooting started. Taliban remnants on the eastern ridge. Muzzle flashes like angry fireflies in the dark, the crack of rounds splitting the air above our heads. Booker dropped to a knee and returned fire. Ling dragged the specialist behind a boulder. Hayes shielded the lieutenant with his own body, and I kept walking, not because I was brave, because stopping was dying. And Danny's wife was at home with rustic pancakes and 8 weeks of a future that needed its father. A round hit the snow 2 feet to my left. Another cracked off a rock somewhere behind me. I heard the whistle of a third one pass close enough to feel the air displacement against my cheek, like someone had flicked a finger past my face at the speed of sound. I kept walking. At 150 meters, I fell. My right foot, the one I could no longer feel, caught on something buried under the snow, a rock, a piece of wreckage I never knew, and I went down. Danny landed on top of me. He screamed again. I heard something in my knee pop, not break, not exactly, but shift in a way that wasn't supposed to happen, and a pain shot from my kneecap to my hip, so sharp it turned my vision white for a full second. I got up. I don't know how. The training, the promise, Catherine's rustic pancakes, something. I got Danny back on my shoulders, and I walked the last 50 meters on a knee that was screaming and a right foot I couldn't feel, and lungs that were burning at 12,000 feet in air too thin to keep a candle lit. The Black Hawk was waiting. Vasquez had brought it as close as physics allowed, the rotor wash turning the snow into a horizontal wall of white. The crew chief reached out and grabbed Danny's vest and pulled him onto the floor of the helicopter. I pushed from below until he was in, all of him, boots and broken legs and the promise I'd made to bring him home. Then I fell. Not dramatically, not heroically. I just stopped, the way a machine stops when the power cuts. My knees hit the snow. Then my hands. Then I was on my side, looking up at the Black Hawk's belly, watching the snow swirl in the rotor wash, and thinking very calmly that the stars above the Hindu Kush were the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. Booker pulled me into the helicopter. I don't remember that part. I remember waking up at Bagram with my right foot in a surgical boot, an IV in my arm, and a doctor standing over me telling me I'd lost 2 toes to frostbite and that my right knee had sustained ligament and cartilage damage that would require surgery and would likely never be the same. Danny survived, both legs saved, though it took 4 surgeries and a year of rehabilitation. He went home to Catherine. Their daughter was born 7 months later. They named her Grace. My unit gave me a name, too. Not on any official form or citation, just in the way soldiers name things when paperwork isn't big enough to hold them. They called me the Angel of Hindu Kush. Booker started it. It stuck. The Air Force gave me the Air Force Cross. I put it in a drawer. The mountain gave me a cane. I use it every day. Danny went home. That should have been the end of the story. Soldier gets hurt, soldier gets saved, soldier goes home to his wife and his rustic pancakes and his baby girl named Grace. Roll credits. Thank you for your service. Move on. But war doesn't end when the plane lands. The mountain comes home with you. It unpacks itself in your closet, sleeps under your bed, and waits for the lights to go off before it starts talking. 6 months after Hindu Kush, Danny was living in Arlington with Catherine and baby Grace. On paper, recovered. Both legs healed, mostly. He walked with a slight limp in the cold, same as me, like the mountain had signed us both with the same handwriting. He'd been medically retired with full honors. He had everything a man is supposed to want. And he was drowning. It started the way it always starts, the way I've seen it start 100 times in my office. Nightmares first, not the kind you wake from and forget. The kind that follow you into the shower and sit across from you at breakfast and turn every loud noise into a gunshot. Then the drinking. Not social drinking. The kind that starts at 2 in the afternoon and doesn't stop until the man in the mirror stops looking like someone he recognizes. Catherine found bottles hidden in the garage, in his truck, behind Grace's baby clothes, as if hiding them near innocence could make them innocent. Then the silence. Danny stopped talking. Not about the mountain, about everything. He'd sit in the den with the lights off, staring at the wall, and Catherine would stand in the doorway holding their daughter and wonder whether the man in that chair was really her husband. Then, on a Tuesday night in March, my phone rang at 2:14 in the morning. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me answered anyway, something that recognized the hour. 2 in the morning calls aren't accidents. They're emergencies wearing phone numbers as disguises. Is this Megan Torres? A woman's voice. Shaking, the kind of shaking that comes from a place where the body has run out of ways to hold itself together. My name is Catherine Ashford, Danny's wife. He told me if anything ever happened, to call you. She was crying, not the soft kind, the kind that breaks words into pieces. He has a gun, Megan. He's in the garage. He won't open the door. He keeps saying he should have died on that mountain. I was already out of bed, already pulling on jeans, grabbing keys, sliding feet into boots without socks. Catherine, stay on the phone. Where's Grace? Asleep. In her crib. Good. Stay near the garage door, but don't open it. Talk to him through the door. Tell him Megan is coming. Tell him I kept my promise on that mountain and I'm keeping it again right now. I drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm. The Beltway was a sheet of ice and I drove it at 60 with one hand on the wheel and the other holding my phone because Catherine was still on the line, talking through the garage door in a voice trying so hard to be steady it made my chest ache. I got there at 2:58. Catherine opened the front door before I knocked. Her face was a map of every kind of fear a person can feel at once. I walked past her to the garage, put my hand flat against the door. Danny, it's Torres. Silence. I didn't carry you 200 meters through a blizzard so you could finish the job in a garage in Arlington. Open the door. More silence. Then a sound. The sound of a man breathing in a way that meant he was still alive and still deciding whether he wanted to be. I'm not leaving, Danny. You know that about me. I'm the stubborn one. You said so yourself on the mountain, remember? A small sound. Almost a laugh. Almost. Open the door. Not for me. For the rustic pancakes. The lock clicked. 3 inches. I saw his face in the gap. Gray, the same gray as the mountain, red-eyed, broken in a way that bones can't be and x-rays can't find. I sat with him on the garage floor until sunrise. The gun was a 9mm Beretta. I didn't take it from him. I let him set it down himself. That matters. In recovery, agency matters. He set it down at 4:17 in the morning. The light was turning the garage window from black to gray, and Danny looked at the gun on the concrete and said, I don't want to be this. Then don't be, I said. Let me help. That's how it began. I took Danny as my first client at the Veterans Center. 18 months. Twice a week at first, then weekly, then bi-weekly as the ground solidified. We talked about the mountain, about the dead, about survivor's guilt and the way the mind replays the worst moments on a loop, not because it's cruel, but because it's trying to solve a problem it can't solve. Catherine sat in on some sessions. We did couples work, rebuilt communication patterns the PTSD had shattered like the Chinook against the ridge. Slowly, Danny came back. Not all the way. You never come all the way back. But far enough to hold his daughter without flinching, far enough to sleep through most nights. Far enough to laugh at Catherine's pancakes and mean it. Catherine called me after the last session, crying. A different kind of crying. The kind that washes instead of wounds. You gave me my husband back, she said. On that mountain you saved his body. In that office you saved his soul. Senator Ashford wanted to meet me. Danny told him about the mountain, with my permission, but not about the counseling. Patient confidentiality is a line I don't cross, not for gratitude. Not for senators. The senator knew my voice from 3 phone calls routed through Danny's number. He knew the story. He knew the name the unit gave me. But he didn't know my face or my full name, and I asked Danny to keep it that way. Jordan didn't know any of this. Not the mountain, not the gun, not the 2 a.m. drive. Not the 18 months or the daughter named Grace or the wife who called me the woman who gave her husband back. Jordan didn't know because Jordan never asked. 5 years. Not once. And my parents. They knew enough. They knew I'd served. They knew about a rescue. Mama had the article. Papa had seen the medal. They didn't connect the dots. Or they chose not to. Because connecting them would have meant confronting Jordan. And confronting Jordan was something the Torres family did not do. They knew enough. And they still put me on the porch. Danny stood 6 feet behind me. I knew it before I turned around. Not because I heard him say my name clearly, the wind on the porch had been swallowing small sounds all evening, but because my body remembered his breathing pattern, the way a surgeon remembers the weight of a scalpel. 14 months since our last session. 18 months of therapy before that. 2 years, 4 months, and some change since I drove through a blizzard at 2 in the morning to talk a good man away from a very bad decision. You don't forget the breathing of someone you pulled back from the edge. I set down the wine glass. The stem clicked against the slate table, thin and precise, like the safety being thumbed off a rifle. Megan. Not a question this time. A confirmation. Danny Ashford stepped onto the porch in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his broad shoulders still carrying that slight leftward tilt, a memento from the crash, the rebuilt collarbone that never quite settled back to symmetry. His hair was shorter than the last time I saw him, cropped military clean, and his face had filled out. Healthy, rested. The hollows under his eyes that I spent 18 months watching slowly disappear were gone. He looked like a man who slept through the night. Something in my chest loosened. Not all the way, just enough to let me breathe a little deeper. Danny. I kept my voice steady, casual. The way you greet someone at a grocery store, not the way you greet someone whose wife once called you at 2 a.m. screaming that he had locked himself in the garage with a loaded Beretta. You look good. He didn't smile. Danny had never been a man who smiled easily, even before the mountain. What he did was something quieter. His jaw relaxed, his shoulders dropped a quarter inch, and his eyes softened the way they used to in session when we finally got past the wall and into the thing underneath. Catherine told me someone was sitting on the porch alone, he said. I thought it was one of the caterer's staff. Came out to check, and then I saw the cane. The cane, my hand-carved oak cane, leaning against the chair where I had placed it, the brass tip catching the faint light from inside. The same cane he had watched me use every session for 18 months. The same cane his father-in-law's best friend had once described in a Pentagon hallway, asking if anyone knew the woman who carried it. Danny looked at the cane, then at me, then at the single-place setting on the table, the dead patio heater, the cold plate of salmon. Why are you out here? 4 words. The same 4 words he had asked me that night in the garage, sitting on the cold concrete floor with the gun between us. Why are you out here? Back then, the answer was simple. Because Catherine called, because I keep promises, because that is what you do for someone who trusted you with the worst version of themselves. Now the answer was more complicated. Jordan invited me, I said, to the engagement dinner. But there were conditions. Danny's expression didn't change. He was a patient man. Years of military discipline, years of therapy, years of learning that silence is sometimes the most generous thing you can offer someone who is about to say something difficult. He asked me not to tell anyone I'm his sister. The silence that followed was different from the silences I had grown accustomed to that evening. The party noise filtered through the glass doors, silverware, laughter, a piano playing something classical and inoffensive. But on the porch, the air thickened. Danny's jaw tightened. Not anger, something deeper. The look of a man doing math in his head, adding up numbers that had never quite balanced, and finally arriving at a total he did not like. You're Jordan Torres' sister, he said slowly. The Jordan Torres who is in there right now, sitting next to my sister, at the main table. And you are out here, on the porch, alone, in October. Danny looked through the glass doors. I watched his eyes find the main table. Isabel's dark hair, Jordan's charcoal suit, the senator at the head with his usual glass of bourbon. Then his eyes moved to table 6, where Rosa sat in her blue dress, and Miguel buttered a roll with the focus of a man who had decided that bread was the safest thing in the room. Does my father-in-law know you're here? Does he know who you are? I understood the question. Not Megan Torres, Jordan's hidden sister, the other identity, the one that mattered to the Ashford family, the woman who fast roped into a blizzard at 12,000 feet, the woman who carried him 200 meters through waist-deep snow, the woman who sat on a garage floor at 3 a.m. and said, "I'm not leaving until you put it down." No, I said. He doesn't. Danny was quiet for a long time. 10 seconds. 15. Long enough for the piano inside to finish its phrase and start a new one. Long enough for a horse in the far stable to let out a low, muffled whinny that carried across the dark pasture like a question no one had asked. Then he turned toward the glass doors. "Stay here," he said. "I'll be right back." It was not a request. It was the voice of a retired Army major who had once commanded 200 soldiers in a combat zone. The voice that I had spent 18 months teaching him to use again, not to give orders, but to trust that his words still carried weight. Danny Ashford walked off the porch and into the light, and I sat there, in the cold, watching his navy suit disappear through the side door, and I thought, this is how it starts. Not with an explosion, not with a dramatic reveal, but with one person who remembers your name walking into a room full of people who were told to forget it. The cane leaned against the table. The wind picked up. The wine was almost gone. I waited. Danny was gone for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I counted. Not on purpose, counting is just something my brain does when the situation turns volatile. In the field, you count seconds between detonations to estimate distance. In therapy, you count breaths to gauge whether a client is spiraling or stabilizing. On a frozen porch in Middleburg, Virginia, you count the minutes because it is the only thing you can control. 4 minutes, 240 seconds, long enough for the piano inside to cycle through an entire Chopin nocturne. Long enough for a server to appear at the glass door, glance at me, and retreat without offering a refill. Long enough for me to consider, very seriously, picking up my cane and walking to the Corolla and driving back to Alexandria and pretending this entire evening was a strange, elaborate dream. I didn't. Not because I was brave, because my knee had stiffened in the cold and standing up would require the kind of effort that makes you grunt, and I did not want to grunt on a senator's porch while wearing my only good dress. Vanity, it turns out, is a more reliable anchor than courage. At minute 3, the noise inside shifted. Nothing dramatic. The laughter didn't stop. The piano didn't halt mid-chord. But there was a change in the room's texture, the way conversation rearranges itself when someone important stands up. I had heard that shift before. In military briefings, when a commanding officer rises from the corner chair. In hospital corridors, when the chief surgeon walks toward a family. A room knows when gravity is about to change. At minute 4, the side door opened. 2 sets of footsteps. One I recognized Danny's measured, slightly uneven gait, the rebuilt hip flexor that made his left step half a beat slower than his right. The second set was heavier, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who had spent decades walking into rooms where everyone stood up when he entered. Senator Charles Ashford stepped onto the porch. He was taller than I expected. Television compresses people, flattens them into 2 dimensions. In person, Charles Ashford was 6'2", broad across the chest in the way of men who were athletes before they were politicians, with silver hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved by a man who believed in straight lines. He wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the only concession to informality, and his shoes clicked against the slate with the precision of a metronome. His eyes found me immediately. Not the table. Not the dead heater, not the single wine glass, me. I have been looked at by many people in many situations, drill sergeants who wanted to break me, insurgents who wanted to kill me, patients who wanted me to save them, my own mother who wanted me to be someone simpler. But the way Charles Ashford looked at me in that moment was something I had not encountered before. It was the look of a man solving a puzzle that had haunted him for 5 years and watching the final piece slide into place. Danny stood behind his father-in-law, hands in his pockets, jaw set. He had told him, not everything there wasn't time for everything in 4 minutes, but enough. The rescue, the mountain, the nickname, the cane. The senator stopped 3 feet from my chair, close enough that I could smell bourbon and cedar, close enough that I could see the small pin on his lapel, not the American flag that politicians usually wear, but a Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor, gold. Worn smooth from years of touching. "Stand up," he said. His voice was quiet, not soft. Charles Ashford did not do soft, but quiet, the way a man speaks when the words are too heavy for volume. I reached for my cane. The oak was cold under my palm. I pressed the brass tip into the slate and pushed myself up, the knee protesting with that deep, grinding ache that never fully announces itself until you are already committed to the motion. It took me 4 seconds to get upright. 4 seconds of visible effort, the kind of effort that Jordan had asked me to hide by leaving the cane in the car. I stood, 5'6" in low heels, looking up at a man who chaired the Intelligence Committee and had once commanded a Marine battalion in Desert Storm. The senator looked at the cane. Then at my right hand, the knuckles still slightly thickened from the frostbite, the skin a shade lighter than the rest of my fingers. Then at my face. He was reading me the way a commander reads a terrain map, not quickly. Not carelessly, with the patience of someone who understands that the most important details are always the ones you almost miss. "Danny tells me," he said, "that you are the woman who carried him off that mountain." Behind him, through the glass, I could see the dining room continuing as if nothing had changed. Jordan was laughing at something Isabel said. Rosa was touching her necklace, the small gold cross she wore to every formal occasion. Miguel was listening to a man in a bow tie with the polite, slightly distant expression of someone who does not fully understand the conversation but refuses to admit it. None of them were looking at the porch. "Yes, sir," I said. The senator's eyes did not leave mine. 5 seconds of silence. Then his right hand moved not forward for a handshake, not into his pocket, but to his side, fingers straightening, palm flat against his thigh. And Senator Charles Ashford, 22-year United States Senator, former Colonel, United States Marine Corps, snapped to attention and saluted me. On the porch, in the cold, with the party still going on behind the glass, and 63 cars parked on the lawn, and my brother inside pretending I didn't exist. A United States Senator saluted me. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. My eyes burned, and my throat tightened, and something behind my sternum cracked open like a door that had been sealed for a very long time. But I did not cry. Because you do not cry when a superior officer renders a salute. You return it. I straightened my back, shifted my weight off the cane, brought my right hand up sharp, clean, the muscle memory of 12 years overriding the cold and the pain and the dress and every single thing that had happened that evening. I returned the salute. We held it for 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough for the wind to carry the sound of the piano through the glass, long enough for Danny to take a slow breath behind us. Then the senator dropped his hand, and he said the words that detonated the entire evening. Why are you out here alone? There are questions that ask for information, and there are questions that tear open floors. Why are you out here alone? Belong to the second category. I could have lied. I am very good at lying, not the manipulative kind, but the survival kind. The kind you learn when you are the only woman on a rescue team and someone asks if you are scared. The kind you perfect when your mother calls and asks if you are eating enough, and you say yes while standing in a kitchen that contains exactly 1 can of black beans and half a bottle of hot sauce. I could have told Senator Ashford that I preferred the fresh air, that I had a headache, that I was saving a seat for someone. But I was tired. Not sleepy tired, the other kind, the kind that settles into your bones after years of being the person who makes everything easier for everyone else. The kind that makes you realize, sitting on a frozen porch in your only good dress, with a dead heater and a cold plate of salmon, that you have spent your entire adult life carrying people off mountains, out of garages, through 18-month therapy programs, and not once has anyone thought to ask where you would like to sit. So, I told the truth. My brother asked me to stay out here, I said. He didn't want anyone to know I'm his sister. The senator did not move. His posture remained locked in that military stillness, feet shoulder-width apart, hands at his sides. But something behind his eyes shifted a recalibration, the way radar adjusts when it detects a new object at close range. Your brother, he repeated. Jordan Torres. He's inside, sitting next to your daughter. I watched it land. The name, the connection, the math. Charles Ashford had commanded Marines in a desert and navigated 22 years of Senate politics, and I watched his mind work through the implications in real time. The man sitting beside Isabel, the man who was about to become his son-in-law, had taken his own sister and placed her on a porch in the cold with a single plate and a broken heater and instructions to lie about her own blood. The senator turned his head toward the glass doors. Through them, Jordan was leaning close to Isabel, one hand on the back of her chair, laughing the way he laughed when he wanted people to believe he was relaxed. My brother had perfected that laugh at Georgetown. It was convincing. It had convinced law professors, hiring partners, board members, and apparently the daughter of one of the most powerful men in Virginia. It did not convince her father, Danny. The senator's voice was low, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned, across decades of command, that the most dangerous orders are the ones delivered quietly. Go inside. Find Catherine. Tell her to come to the porch. Tell her to bring a coat. Danny nodded once and disappeared through the side door. The senator pulled out the second chair, the one that had been empty all evening, pushed against the wall, not part of the single-place setting, and sat down across from me. He did not ask permission. He did not offer pleasantries. He sat the way a man sits when he intends to stay. Tell me, he said. 2 words. No clarification needed. I understood exactly what he was asking. Not just the porch, not just tonight, the whole thing. So I told him about the phone call on Thursday night. Jordan's voice after 5 months of silence, cheerful and strategic, announcing the engagement like a press release. The conditions: no sister, no cane, no complicated backstory. Sit on the porch. Smile if someone wanders by. Leave before dessert. I told him about my parents, Rosa and Miguel, seated at table 6, aware of the arrangement, complicit in their quiet, complicated way. My mother, who called me Friday evening to confirm I would cooperate, her voice carrying that particular blend of love and apology that I had been decoding since childhood. My father, who showed his devotion through silence and bread. I told him about 12 years in the Air Force, the rescues he already knew about in the abstract, the Hindu Kush, the 200 meters of snow, the 2 toes, the knee, and the ones he didn't, Mogadishu, the shoulder scar beneath my dress strap, the Air Force Cross in a desk drawer, the award ceremony that Jordan missed because he had a client dinner. I told him about the second rescue, the one that mattered more than the mountain, Danny in the garage, the loaded Beretta, Catherine's voice at 2 a.m, cracking along its seams. The 40-minute drive through a snowstorm to sit on a concrete floor and say the same thing I said at 12,000 feet. I'm not leaving until this is over. The senator listened without interrupting. He did not reach for his bourbon. He did not check his watch. He sat across from me on a cold porch with his hands folded on the table, and he listened the way I had taught Danny to listen in therapy completely, without rehearsing his response, letting the words arrive at their own speed. When I finished, the silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. Then Catherine arrived. She stepped onto the porch carrying a long wool coat, camel-colored, expensive, the kind of coat that belongs to a woman who has never had to choose between heating and groceries. She draped it over my shoulders without a word, then leaned down and kissed the top of my head. "I didn't know you were out here," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The coat was warm. It smelled like vanilla and something floral. It was the first warm thing I had felt in over an hour. The senator stood up. "Catherine," he said, "stay with her. I need to go inside." He straightened his lapel, the marine pin, the eagle and globe worn smooth, and walked through the side door. Not toward the main hallway. Not toward the piano. Toward the main table. The coat settled around my shoulders. Catherine pulled her chair close and took my hand. Through the glass, I watched the senator's silver hair move through the room like a compass needle finding north. He was walking toward Jordan. I have seen men walk into firefights with less purpose than Senator Charles Ashford walking toward table 1. Catherine's hand tightened around mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both watched through the glass as the senator moved through the dining room with the unhurried precision of a man who had spent a lifetime entering rooms where the outcome depended on his next words. Guests parted without being asked, not dramatically, not like a movie, but in the subtle, instinctive way that people make space for someone who carries authority the way other men carry wallets. The piano stopped. Not because anyone told it to. The pianist simply looked up, read the room, and lifted his fingers from the keys. Smart man. Jordan saw him coming. I know my brother. I know the way his confidence operates, layered, rehearsed, climate-controlled. I know the exact moment it falters, because I spent 18 years in the same house watching him practice it. It falters in his hands. The rest of his body can maintain the performance, the smile, the posture, the eye contact, but his hands betray him. They go still, not relaxed, still, frozen still. The stillness of a man who suddenly realizes he is standing on a surface that might not hold. Jordan's hands went still on the tablecloth. The senator stopped at the head of the table. His table, his house, his daughter's engagement dinner. He placed one hand on the back of his chair, not sitting, not gripping, just resting it there, the way you rest your hand on a railing before you decide whether to jump or stay. Jordan. The senator's voice carried across the room without effort, not raised, not theatrical, pitched at the exact volume that makes an entire room stop chewing. "I'd like to ask you something." Isabel looked up. Her expression was open, curious, unalarmed. She had no reason to expect what was coming. She touched Jordan's arm lightly, a gesture of support, of partnership, the kind of touch that says, whatever this is, we handle it together. My chest ached watching it. Not jealousy, something older and more complicated than jealousy. "Of course, sir." Jordan's voice was steady. His hands were not. "You told me," the senator said, "that you have no siblings." The room shifted. Not the furniture, the air. The molecules rearranged themselves the way they do in the half-second between a lightning flash and the thunder that follows. Every person at every table understood, on some primal level, that they were about to witness something they would discuss in parking lots and kitchens for years. Jordan's smile held. Barely. "Aye, sir. I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean, there is a woman sitting on my porch, alone, in the cold, with a plate of leftover salmon and a broken heater." The senator's voice remained level. Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. "She tells me her name is Megan Torres. She tells me she is your sister. She also tells me that you asked her to come tonight but instructed her to hide that fact." Isabel's hand slid off Jordan's arm. That small movement, 5 fingers lifting from a charcoal sleeve, was louder than anything the senator had said. I watched it through the glass, and I felt it in my sternum, a vibration like a tuning fork struck against bone. "She also tells me," the senator continued, and now his voice dropped half a register into the range that I imagined he used in classified briefings and closed-door committee sessions, "that she is a retired Air Force combat rescue officer, that she served 3 tours, that she received the Air Force Cross." A murmur rippled through the room. Not words, just sound, the collective exhale of 60 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about the evening. "And she tells me," the senator paused. 1 beat. 2, the silence was surgical, "that she is the woman who pulled my son-in-law off a mountain in the Hindu Kush. The woman who carried him 200 meters through a blizzard at 12,000 feet. The woman my family has been trying to find for 5 years." The room went absolutely still. Not quiet. Still. There is a difference. Quiet is the absence of noise. Stillness is the absence of everything movement, breath, the small, unconscious fidgeting that humans do every 7 seconds without realizing it. 60 people became statues. Forks suspended, glasses halfway to lips. The server near the kitchen door froze with a bread basket in her hands. Jordan's face drained. I watched the color leave it, the way water leaves a bathtub, slowly at first, then all at once. His carefully constructed evening, his flawless seating chart, his Georgetown smile, his 5 months of strategic silence, all of it unraveled in the time it took a 70-year-old senator to speak 4 sentences. "Dad." Isabel's voice was thin, confused. She looked at Jordan. "You told me you were an only child." There it was. The lie underneath the lie. Not just that Megan should stay hidden tonight, but that Megan had been erased entirely, permanently. Surgically removed from Jordan's biography, like a classified paragraph redacted from a public report. Jordan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in his adult life, my brother, the man who could talk his way into any room, any boardroom, any future, had nothing to say. Rosa stood up at table 6. My mother, 5'3" in her blue Easter dress, the gold cross catching the chandelier light, her hands trembling at her sides. She didn't look at the senator. She didn't look at Jordan. She looked through the glass doors, directly at the porch, directly at me. Our eyes met through the window, 30 feet of warm dining room between us, a lifetime of love and silence and complicated choices between us. And my mother's face crumbled, not dramatically, not with a sound, but the way old walls crumble, slowly, from the inside, when the foundation finally admits what it has known all along. Miguel placed his napkin on the table, stood up, took Rosa's hand. They walked toward the porch door. My mother has a way of walking that tells you everything before she opens her mouth. When she is happy, Rosa Torres walks quickly, almost bouncing, her small feet barely touching the ground, as if joy has made her lighter. When she is angry, she walks with sharp, clipped steps, each one a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence she hasn't said yet. When she is carrying something heavy inside her grief, guilt, the accumulated weight of choices she cannot undo, she walks slowly, deliberately, as if every step requires a negotiation between her body and whatever is sitting on her chest. She walked slowly toward the porch. Miguel held her hand. My father's grip is unmistakable, thick fingers, calloused palms, the hands of a man who has spent 40 years turning copper wire into light. He held Rosa's hand the way he holds everything, firmly, without drama, with the quiet certainty of someone who believes that presence is more valuable than words. Catherine released my hand and stood up. She didn't leave. She stepped back, creating space the way a good therapist creates space, not by disappearing, but by rearranging herself so the people who need the room can have it. The porch door opened. Cold air from the dining room rushed out, warm and perfumed, carrying the ghost of the evening roasted lamb, white roses, bourbon, the faint chemical sweetness of expensive cologne. For a moment, the two temperatures collided on the threshold, warm inside meeting cold outside, and I thought, that is what this family has always been. Two climates pretending to share the same house. Rosa stepped onto the slate. Her blue dress looked different out here, away from the chandelier light, darker, more ordinary, the dress of a woman who had picked it because it was the nicest thing she owned, not because it belonged in a room full of people who spent more on wine than she earned in a month. She stopped 4 feet from me, close enough to touch, far enough to hesitate. Mia? One word, Spanish, the word she had used when I was 7 and fell off my bicycle and split my chin open on the sidewalk. The word she whispered when I shipped out for my first deployment and she stood at the airport gate long after the plane had left the ground. The word she had stopped using somewhere in the last 5 years, replaced by careful English, by honey, by my full name, by the slow, unconscious distance that grows between a mother and the child she does not know how to explain to other people. Mija. My daughter. Mama. Rosa's face did the thing it had done through the glass, but closer now, and worse. The crumbling, the slow interior collapse of a woman who has spent years building a careful architecture of justification. He needs this. It's just one dinner. She'll understand. She's strong. She's always been strong, and watching it all come down in the time it takes a senator to say 4 sentences in a dining room. I didn't. She stopped. Swallowed. Tried again. I thought you would be okay out here. Jordan said it was just for a few hours. He said it was important. You thought I'd be fine, I said, because I'm always fine. It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis, the kind of observation that arrives not with anger, but with the exhausted clarity of someone who has finally identified the pattern. Megan is strong. Megan survived a war. Megan can handle anything. Therefore, Megan can handle being hidden, being erased, being seated alone on a porch in October while her family eats lamb inside and pretends she is someone else's problem. The logic is airtight. The logic is also monstrous. Rosa's tears came quietly, not the dramatic, cinematic kind. The real kind, the kind that leak out sideways, that a woman tries to stop by pressing her lips together and blinking fast and tilting her head back slightly, as if gravity might help. It doesn't. It never does. Miguel released Rosa's hand and stepped forward. My father is not a man who makes speeches. In 62 years on this earth, I doubt he has delivered more than a dozen sentences longer than 10 words. He communicates through action, a repaired faucet, a mowed lawn, a hand on your shoulder at precisely the moment you need it. He placed his hand on my shoulder. His palm was warm, rough, heavy with the specific gravity of a man who does not know how to say I'm sorry but understands. Somewhere beneath the silence and the bread and the decades of letting other people set the terms, that his daughter was alone in the cold and he was inside buttering a roll. Papa. He nodded. Once. His eyes were wet. Miguel Torres does not cry, or rather, Miguel Torres has a lifetime agreement with his tear ducts that they will not operate in public, and tonight, for the first time that I could remember, that agreement was under severe renegotiation. Rosa reached for me. I let her. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders carefully, the way you hug someone who you know has a bad knee and a scar on their shoulder, and 12 years of damage that doesn't show on x-rays, and she held on. She smelled like gardenias, the same perfume she had worn my entire life, the smell of Saturday mornings in Falls Church, of birthday cakes cooling on the counter, of a woman who crossed a border with $200 and a nursing certificate and built an entire life out of stubbornness and love and the unwavering belief that her children would have it better. I should have said something, Rosa whispered into my hair. Years ago, I should have told him no. I closed my eyes. The coat Catherine had given me was warm around my shoulders. My mother's arms were warm around the coat. For the first time in 50 minutes, possibly for the first time in 5 years, I was not cold. Behind us, through the glass, the dining room hummed with the low murmur of 60 people processing what they had witnessed. I could not see Jordan. I did not look for him. That conversation would come, but not tonight. Tonight was not about confrontation. Tonight was about a porch, and a mother, and the terrifying, fragile, imperfect act of showing up late to a place you should have been all along. Miguel's hand stayed on my shoulder. Rosa's arms stayed around me. Catherine stood quietly behind us, guarding the door like a sentry. The wind carried the smell of hay from the stables. A horse shifted in the dark. The October sky was full of stars that did not care about any of us, and that, somehow, was a comfort. I left Ashford Hall at 11:14 that night. Not through the side door. Not through the service corridor past the kitchen and the staff bathrooms and the hallway that smells like industrial cleaner. Catherine walked me through the front entrance, the real entrance, the one with the oak double doors and the brass knockers shaped like lions, and the stone steps that generations of Ashfords had climbed on their way to dinners and christenings and Christmas mornings. She held my arm on the left side while Danny held the right, and I descended 3 steps on a bad knee with more dignity than I had felt in years. The senator was waiting by my car. I don't know how long he had been standing there. Long enough to notice the dent in the rear bumper. Long enough to read the faded yellow parking permit from the Veterans Counseling Center on the dashboard. He stood beside my 2011 Toyota Corolla, parked among 63 vehicles that each cost more than my apartment, with his hands clasped behind his back, in the at-ease position that Marines carry in their muscle memory long after the uniform comes off. "Megan," he said, "I owe you a debt that I cannot repay. Not for tonight, for 5 years of silence from a family that should have found you sooner." I shook my head. "You didn't know, sir." "I should have," he said it simply, without performance. The way a man states a fact that he intends to act on, "I will." He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm and warm, and he held the handshake 2 seconds longer than protocol required, not a power move, just a man making sure the moment registered. Then he did something I did not expect. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small white card. Thick stock, embossed letterhead, a personal phone number written in blue ink on the back. "That is my direct line," he said. "Not the Senate office, not the staff. Mine. If you need anything you call that number." I took the card, slid it into the pocket of Catherine's coat, which I was still wearing because she had refused 3 separate times to take it back. Danny drove me home. Catherine sat in the back seat of their black Audi, one hand resting on my shoulder for the entire 40-minute drive from Middleburg to Alexandria. Nobody spoke much. The radio played low, something acoustic, something with a guitar, and the highway lights slid across the windshield in steady amber pulses. Danny drove the way he had learned to live after therapy, carefully, with both hands on the wheel, checking his mirrors not out of fear, but out of the habit of paying attention. They walked me to my apartment door. 3rd floor, no elevator. Danny carried my cane up the stairs while I held the railing, and Catherine carried a container of food that the Ashford kitchen staff had prepared without being asked. Roasted lamb, potatoes, 2 slices of chocolate cake, and a small bottle of red wine, with a handwritten note that said, "For the woman on the porch." With respect, the handwriting was the senator's. At my door, Danny hugged me. Not the careful, clinical hug of a former client maintaining boundaries. A real hug. The kind where you feel the other person's heartbeat against your chest, and neither of you counts the seconds. "I should have come to the porch sooner," he said. "You came," I said. "That's the part that matters." Catherine hugged me next. She smelled like vanilla and the wool coat and the faintest trace of the evening's white roses. She pressed her cheek against mine and whispered, "You are coming to Thanksgiving, at our table." "I'm not asking." I closed the door, set the food on the kitchen counter, hung Catherine's coat on the hook by the door. I would return it, eventually, but not yet. Leaned the cane against the wall. Sat down on my couch in my only good dress and looked at the ceiling and let the apartment be quiet around me. The phone buzzed at 11:51. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jordan. 3 words. "I am sorry." I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the coffee table. Not because I wasn't going to respond. Not because I was angry. Anger had burned through me hours ago, on the porch, somewhere between the dead heater and the cold salmon, and what remained was something quieter, something more complicated, something that would take time to name. I set the phone down because some apologies need space before they can be received, like a wound that needs air before it can heal. Jordan's 3 words were a beginning, not a resolution. They were the first sentence of a conversation that would take months, maybe years, and I was not going to rush it at midnight on a Saturday in October. I would respond, tomorrow, or the day after, when I was ready, on my terms, at my table. I pulled the chocolate cake from the container, ate it slowly, sitting cross-legged on the couch, still in the black dress with the Mogadishu scar visible at the shoulder. The cake was extraordinary dark, dense, slightly bitter, the kind of cake that someone with real skill and real butter makes when they understand that sweetness is best when it arrives alongside something that has earned it. Outside, Alexandria was quiet. A siren in the distance, a dog barking 2 blocks south. The ordinary, unremarkable sounds of a city that does not know or care that a woman in a third-floor apartment just spent an evening being erased, and then slowly, unevenly, imperfectly being written back in. I think about that night often. Not the cold, not the salmon, not even the salute, although that moment lives in a room in my memory that I visit when I need to remember that recognition does not always come from the people who owe it to you. Sometimes it comes from a stranger who simply bothers to look. What I think about most is the porch. Not as a place of punishment, not anymore. I think about it as the place where I sat still long enough for the truth to find me. The place where I stopped performing resilience and allowed myself to be exactly what I was, cold, tired, hurt, and waiting for someone to open the door. If you are sitting on someone's porch right now, and you know what I mean, you know the metaphor, you know the specific loneliness of being invited but not included, of being present but not seen, I want you to know something. The door opens. Not always when you expect it, not always by the person you hope for, but it opens. Sometimes it is a man you saved on a mountain who recognizes your cane. Sometimes it is a senator who decides that silence is no longer acceptable. Sometimes it is your own mother, 5 years late, smelling like gardenias, whispering a word in Spanish that she should never have stopped using. The door opens, and when it does, you walk through it, not because you have forgiven everyone, not because the cold didn't hurt, but because you carried a man 200 meters through a blizzard, and you sat on a concrete floor at 3 a.m, and you spent 12 years learning that the hardest rescue is the one where you have to save yourself. You walk through the door. You sit at the table, not the one they assigned you, the one you built. My name is Megan Torres. I am 35 years old. I am a retired Air Force combat rescue officer, a trauma counselor, a daughter, a sister, and the woman they called the Angel of Hindu Kush. And I don't sit on porches anymore. If this story found you at the right time, if it reminded you that your seat is not on the porch, I'd appreciate it if you hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, for the door.